Alrighty, so we're going to be looking at the behavioral approach, which is the second type of management approach that you can have as a manager of a business. And one of the first things that you'll notice is that a behavioral approach actually has a much flatter management structure, as you can see in this particular pyramid over here. So a classical or scientific approach has lots of levels of leadership. There's a lot more levels in that pyramid, and in order to make a decision, it has to go from one person to the next person up the chain of command. So a behavioral approach really adopts this flatter management structure. So according to the syllabus, what we need to know is all about what the behavioral approach is and the characteristics of a manager who adopts a behavioral approach in having leadership characteristics, motivating and communicating characteristics. The behavioral approach also emphasizes the concept of using teams rather than the hierarchical organizational structure. So there are smaller teams that are all on a sort of level playing field. And the leadership style that gets used is this participative or democratic leadership style, which essentially means that people below the high up managers actually have a voice in their business and in what they say. So just like we live in a democracy, we get to elect our particular government and our prime minister and things like that. The same sort of concept is adopted in this approach. So what are the main features of this approach? Essentially, it's all about the human interaction and having a sort of humanistic approach in that you identify that your employees are the most important resource in your business and that you have to look after them and care about them in a certain way. And that is why the economic and social needs of your employees are the number one priority as a manager. You care about your employees. Like I said before, in a democratic leadership style, you have employees participating in the decision-making process associated with it. There's also team-based structures, and a really good example of that you can see within our school. So we will have the executive committee in that school, and that includes the headmaster and the deputy headmaster and all your different things, and then you have separate teams. So you'll have academic teams, and then you have your pastoral teams. And so your pastoral teams would include Mr. Allen and Mr. Galuzzo and Dr. Delaney and Mr. Garrett as well. And then beneath them would also then be your housemasters and your middle school housemasters, but then they also form smaller teams with the tutors in the particular houses. And then on an academic side, you're also looking at the curriculum office as being the big team that runs the academic side, but then you also have each different department. So you'll have the economics department, the science department, the maths department, and within those, there's a team-based structure, and your head of departments is the leader of that smaller team. So we have this in our own school. It's also really important that managers have good interpersonal skills. That's really important as well, because you are dealing with people and you're communicating a lot more with them and involving them in the whole process. So when we're looking at management and leading is all about influencing or motivating people in the business place in order to work to achieve the business's objectives. So whether the business's objectives are to improve customer service or to increase profits or increase market share, a leader and a good manager that leads their teams or those below them is someone who is able to influence and motivate them to work in order to achieve those goals. And that's all about the attitude of the manager and how they deal with people. So characteristics of good leadership can be seen in the Coach Carter movie, which is about a basketball coach that takes over a particularly difficult team. You're going to watch a clip of that, and also in another movie clip. And you can see the characteristics, and I want you to go into our discussion forum and outline what are the characteristics of these particular leaders. Okay, so when it comes to management as a source of motivation as well, a manager that adopts the behavioral approach will definitely try to energize and direct and sustain an individual's behavior. You want your employees to be motivated. You want them to be energized to do their work. And by doing that, it causes a person to behave a certain way. So it's like a personal force. It's particular actions by a leader that helps to let their staff members behave in a certain way, which hopefully is in a way that's more productive and beneficial for the business. And there are lots of different ways that managers can achieve that. Now, obviously, there are your financial rewards. You could say bonuses or commission, or you could give people career opportunities and fancy cars and all these different things. But we're focusing on the interpersonal skills when it comes to a behavioral approach. So good things like offering support. If you have something that's particularly difficult, or you know that there's lots going on, giving support to the people below you under your management will really help to motivate them and do well, because they feel like that assistance is there to help them. Giving them things like feedback. So telling them that they're doing a good job, or if they're not doing a good job, telling it in a way that's still supportive. Other examples could be positive reinforcement. It could also be things like leading by example. And lastly, another example could be by taking on their ideas. So there's a lot of different other ways that you can do that, but these are some of the ways that if you take on people's ideas, they're going to be more motivated then, because they're doing something that they're involved in as well. Now, when it comes to communication, that's really important for a manager, because obviously if you're dealing with people significantly, then you need to be communicating in a very effective way, and effective communication is really, really necessary. Businesses, and especially larger businesses with big organizational structures, need to ensure that communication is effective in order to make sure that business goals are achieved. So for example, in this whole coronavirus scenario that we're in, a lot of the communication, things are really difficult for teachers as well. We're getting new information every day, and we are trying to adapt to that new information, but having effective communication from your heads of department, or from your housemaster if you're a tutor, or from the curriculum office, that effective communication has really helped to ease that process and make us feel like we definitely have some idea what we're doing, we're informed, and that also has a motivating effect as well. If your instructions are not communicated clearly, then people sort of don't really know what they're doing, are less productive, and more likely to be unhappy in their workplace as well. So communication is really important, and that can happen in a variety of forms. Obviously, we can have verbal communication, we can have written communication, and even things like body language is really important as well. So you could even look at the fact that we have video conferences every lesson. That's not something that's necessary, but the communication between looking at someone and talking to them is obviously something that's considered invaluable, and that's why we're incorporating it into all of our lessons. It's much more effective than sitting there and writing an email, or it's a lot more effective than just giving some comments on an assignment. Talking is definitely the way to go forward. Next, we've got the whole idea of working as a team. So teamwork is all about people who work and interact with each other regularly, and they are coordinated to work towards a common goal. So if you have really effective teamwork, it can be the catalyst, and it can really support really good performance in a team and be a really motivating element. So for example, if you're looking at a sporting team, if they don't work as a team and have each other's backs or support one another, then they're obviously going to fail as a team. If they all have their own individual agendas and they're not really working together, that's not going to help anyone. So it's really important that people who are working towards a common goal form this team, and hopefully that will be able to motivate them and achieve superior results in the business environment. And managers also need to be really careful about group dynamics and pick and match people that'll work effectively together. So for example, even when I do certain things in my classes that I teach, when I create groups for group work, I'll specifically pick certain people because I might know who might not work together, who might distract each other, or who might really be able to support another student or help another student, and it could be an unlikely pair. So it's really important that you understand group dynamics as well in the team in order to actually have effective teams. And in this case, the manager doesn't control anything. They set up teams, and the manager just facilitates that. They'll check in, they'll make sure that they're sort of doing the right thing, but they're not actually the ones controlling and telling them to do this and this and this and this. They're facilitating, they're helping them to get to their final goal. And democratic leadership is the type of leadership style. A participative or democratic leadership style is what is adopted in the behavioral approach. And that is someone who asks their employees for their suggestion and then seriously considers those suggestions when making decisions. So it's not all about just listening and saying, okay, what do you think? And then hearing, and then not doing anything about it. If you're actually taking those suggestions seriously and trying to incorporate them in your business, then that is a democratic leader. That's someone who's really listening. And like I said before, a democratic leader is very similar to our whole democracy governing system that we have in Australia and many countries. And it's where, you know, we get to vote for our prime minister. We vote, we have a voice in our government. And this is the same thing on a business scale. So people have a voice and it's seriously taken. So these are sort of some different features between the two management styles that we've looked at so far. So in terms of decision making, in the autocratic, the manager makes all the decisions and then just tells the employees. In a participative leadership style, they consult with employees and then ask them for suggestions, and then they decide with what they're doing. In terms of control, the manager in an autocratic system controls all the activities. In a participative, they share that decision making with their employees. Similarly, there's a high level of employee empowerment. They participate significantly in a democratic leadership style, and an authoritarian manager will expect employees to just follow what they do. And communication comes from the top, from the CEO of a business, and worms its way down the business structure in that hierarchical business structure that we looked at for an autocratic manager. But in a democratic manager, you'll see that there's two-way communication. Every person is listening and sharing their ideas. Like I said, in terms of motivation methods, you can use money and rewards and maybe even consequences, and an autocratic manager will use that. But things like encouraging, supporting, empowering, giving positive feedback, that sense of fulfillment and satisfaction is the way that a democratic manager will motivate their employees. And so you can sort of think of an autocratic manager as maybe a dictator or a military officer during that wartime. If you go back to our video that we watched yesterday, you can think of Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter telling the kids what they're going to do in the classroom, whereas a participative manager listens to the students in the classroom and takes on their feedback and incorporates that within their teaching. And so you can just pause this here, and this is essentially a list of strengths and weaknesses. I'm not going to talk through all of them. You can pause them and definitely take some notes. There are strengths and weaknesses to a lot of these things. More importantly, you can't have your staff members having too much power over the decision-making process. It's going to take a much more significant amount of time. So there is a line that you have to sort of draw when it comes to how much employee input, because at the end of the day, to make a decision, if you have to get employee input every single time, it's going to take too long, and it's just too I've lost the words right now, but it drags out too much. So essentially, there's a line that you have to draw. But the strength of the behavioral approach is that your employees are going to be much more happy overall. And happier employees equals motivated employees, which equals more productive employees, which equals that your business goals are more likely to be achieved. So have a pause of this and have a read through of them.